In this video, we will explore some interesting coincidences in Gematria, which are about eternal covenants. Both the Noahide code and the 613 mitzvot, or divine laws given at Sinai, are described in the Torah as eternal or everlasting covenants. The 613 plus 7. I'm going to show you some results using a novel technique in Gematria. I don't believe this technique has ever been used before, but it produced some very interesting, intriguing coincidences that are backed up by the written and oral torahs and the commentaries, so I thought I would share them here. And it just goes to show you how beautiful the Torah is, and these things could definitely be considered potential evidence for an intelligent design beyond human capability. That's my opinion. It's potentially. Okay, so let's have a look at how this can work using this technique. So first, we have 1 Chronicles chapter 16, verses 15 through 17. Our focus will be 16 and 17. But this is to establish that we're speaking of a covenant. Remember his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, the covenant which he had made with Abraham, and his oath to Isaac, and he set it up for Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. Interesting, the Hebrew for everlasting covenant, the first time it ever shows up is in God's speaking to Noah, once he sets up the covenant with the rainbow as a sign. The verses are about the covenant, clearly. Okay, so this program on the website, which is thetrugmans.com, Gematria, or word and Gematria search, they will tell you how, where, and how many times a given word, phrase, or verse exists in the entire Tanakh. Or you can search it by book. It also tells you every time a certain number value exists. So as we saw in other videos, every letter has a number value. Add up the number values you get for one word, and the word has a total. It has a number value. Now if you add up number values of words, then you have another number value, and that can carry on up to an entire verse, which can have its own number value. So these are all sums. Anytime a number value shows up, it is highlighted in red as a match. The number value of the search term at the top shows up in brackets. So if you search something, punch it in there or type it in, you'll get the value of that word or phrase or verse. And you'll see every time it shows up. Not only the word itself, but the value. Total matches represents the number of times that value shows up in the entire Tanakh. So 1 Chronicles 16 and 17 will be our focus, both about the covenant. So I took the verse 16 in Hebrew and copied and pasted it into the search. You'll see the verse has a value of 2798, and 2798 shows up as a sum in the entire Tanakh 365 times. 365 is the years of Enoch, who walked with God. 365 can also be found in the covenant at Sinai. 365 is the amount of negative commandments. So of the 613, which the verse is describing, we have 365 negative commandments. The verse is describing covenant, and the value of the verse shows up 365 times in the entire Tanakh, which is 403,901 words. Interesting coincidence. So now we will check out the exact same verse as numbers. So like I said, every word is also a number. And here it is as numbers. And we saw earlier this value showed up 365 times, which is the number of the negative commandments. And here we see in the verse as the name Abraham, 248. 248 is the number of positive commandments. So a verse about the covenant has, the verse about a covenant has a value that shows up in the entire text 365 times. Then if you look at the verse as numbers, 248 shows up. I don't have this next in the document, but I know for a fact, and you can look this up, that there are 620 Hebrew characters in the Ten Commandments. So the entire Ten Commandments section of the Torah consists of 620 Hebrew characters. So 248, 365, and 620, all in one verse about the covenant. That's pretty neat. Right, so a verse about the covenant at Sinai, consisting of 613 divine laws, has 613 encoded into it. But how would you know that without a computer? You couldn't count the number values. That's mind-boggling to try and do that on purpose. But check out the next verse, which is also about the covenant, which is 16 verse 17. And just to remind you, and he set it up for Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. So back-to-back verses about the covenant. Here it is in the search in Hebrew. This is an interesting verse. We see that it has the entire verse has a value of 1824. And there's everlasting covenant right here. And we see that actually this verse, here it is, 16:17, also exists exactly in Psalms 105 verse 10. So this is a twin verse. Very interesting. But anyway, 1824. So we remember this is about the covenant. We saw earlier that 613 is encoded into the other one as 365 and 248 and 620. And then we see the value 1824. Let's see how many times. And we mentioned everlasting covenant. The first time it comes up is the covenant with Noah. Here's the same verse about the covenant at Sinai, 16:17, has the value 1824. Look how many times 1824 shows up as a value in the entire Tanakh. So the verse about the covenant of 613 laws has a total value, 1824, that is found 613 times in the entire Torah, or entire Tanakh. So back-to-back verses about the covenant both have 613 encoded into them. Interesting coincidence, to say the least, and how could you ever know this without a computer? How could this be achieved on purpose? Massive ancient text. It just seems impossible. Feel free to contact me if you have any comments on this. I think it's some interesting potential evidence. I hope it has some effect on someone. Here's another interesting result using a slightly different technique that will eventually lead to the cainites. And it has to do with the Noahide code, and it has been my opinion throughout this that the cainites were 7 law followers at the very least, proper observant B'nai Noach, so they believed in one God, 7 laws. They were monotheists from the very beginning. So here is Mount Sinai in Hebrew. It has the value 335. Mount Sinai, Har Sinai, 335. Total matches 612. That's interesting to me because 612 is the value of the Hebrew word for covenant, which is brit. And we see brit here. Covenant, value 612. So Mount Sinai, the value of Mount Sinai exists 612 times, and 612 is the value of the word for covenant. Where was the covenant established? Mount Sinai, of course. So here's our original verse. That's pretty interesting. We just start stacking up the coincidences, but there's more, and this should tie it all together. And it's especially interesting because it is backed up by the source material. So here's our original verse, 15:19 in Hebrew. So this is the Kenites, the Kenites, the Canaanites in the Hebrew. And we see that verse has a value of 1771, which also has the value, the same total number of total matches as Mount Sinai, as the value of Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai was 335 and had 612 total matches. This is 1771, and it also has 612 total matches. And 612 is the value of the word for covenant. Now there are 2 ways to interpret this, as far as I can tell. First, we know that these lands are part of the covenant made with Abraham, as we saw earlier. So that makes perfect sense, and they're part of the messianic prophecy that these lands will be part of Israel someday, in the expanded borders of Israel. However, as a Noahide, I also like the following interpretation. The Kenites represent perhaps the highest level for B'nai Noah. So which means that they kept the Noahide laws going back into the times of Noah to Abraham. We have seen that at least certain cainites were held in the highest regard. The literature stated earlier that the cainites were scholars and scribes and even held a place in the Sanhedrin. We saw that Genesis 15:19 had a total value of 1771. Below is the search term B'nai Noah. It has the value 120. But check out the number of matches. Sorry about that. Check out the number of matches for B'nai Noah. 1771 is the number of matches, which is the value of Genesis 15:19. Interesting coincidence, considering they are B'nai Noah. The total match numbers are the same as the value of that verse. Not only that, the verse, which had the value of 1771, had the total matches for that verse were 612. So what covenant were they obeying or conforming to, adhering to? It was the covenant of the B'nai Noah. So let's go over that again, just so we're clear. Okay. So we saw that Har Sinai. Let's go all the way back to the beginning here. Okay, Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, has the value 335. 335 is found 612 times. 612 is the value of the word brit, which is covenant. The covenant was established at Mount Sinai. So the value of the words Mount Sinai exists 612 times. Here's our verse again. Has the value, the entire verse has a value 1771. Also exists 612 times, which is the value of the word brit. But then it gets interesting because B'nai Noah, the value of B'nai Noah is 120, and 120 exists in the Tanakh 1771 times. So I just wanted to share that little coincidence with you and show that there's something going on here, and that we know for sure in the text that the Kenites were B'nai Noah, and they were monotheistic. So they followed the Noahide code, and it just happens to be backed up in this novel form of Gematria, which is essentially counting number values. So it's not so much addition as it is multiplication. I'm going to stop it there, but hopefully you guys were able to follow along with that. And if you weren't, just back up the video and check it out again, because what is going on there is the number values and the number of times certain values come up are flip-flopping back and forth, and they all explain each other. Very interesting, to say the least. Thank you very much. If you have any comments, please leave some, and you can get a hold of me if you like at JethroAndTheKenites at gmail.com.